some positivity that isn't Red Bull. And it is Valtteri Bottas. Nice little P3 from him in the Alfa Romeo. Of course, he was on the C5 tyres, which was the same tyre as Hamilton. And yeah, a very nice lap from Valtteri. Of course, if you remember, this time last year, he came out the blocks firing and was beating the Mercedes in qualifying and racking up a huge amount of points at the start of the season. Of course, Alfa Romeo then went on to have a terrible streak of luck, either the car breaking down or just generally the performance not being there. But Bottas looked very nice on the final day, and you start to wonder, could there be the likes of Bottas and Alonso putting themselves quite high up the grid when we go to qualifying next week? Oh yeah, for the first round of the season.
Yeah, Jake Guan Yu is P1 yesterday as well, so they don't look too bad. It is only testing, like we say, but it's a positive start for Alfa Romeo because they realistically need to be moving on up.
Let's move maybe towards the more disappointing end and some teams that may not be too happy. And it seems to be a running trend that we're going to talk about McLaren again. It just doesn't seem to be clicking for them. They had some wheel brow issues, which there's been talk about them not being stable enough and in itself needing potentially more weight to the car, which is going to slow them down. I say disappointing, but then when Oscar Piastri was interviewed during the day today, he was going, yeah, we're kind of on target with where we kind of expected, which goes against everything Zach Brown said, was it yesterday? Where he was saying we haven't hit any target and we're basically screwed. So I wonder if Piastri was just trying to be quite generic. He was like, yeah, we'll be fighting in the midfield.
I'm just looking at the kind of what McLaren did. They did the least laps out of anyone. In fact, the two people that did the least laps were Norris and Piastri. Norris with 37 laps, Piastri with 44. So their car doesn't look particularly fast, and it also doesn't look particularly reliable. So yeah, they've had a shocker, to say the least.
We have move on very quickly now to picking one biggest winner from testing and then one biggest loser. I'm going to start, I think, the biggest winner. I was torn between two, one being Red Bull, but when I'm actually thinking about winner, I'm thinking about progress. So I'm going to go with Aston Martin as my biggest winner, just purely because they seem to have taken a big step forward. Alonso seems hungry, seems like he likes the car, really wants to, knuckle down, and the focus is really there. Seems slightly reborn. Maybe the fact that they've not got a secure number 2 driver at the moment is probably the only part that's pulling them back a tiny bit. Because yeah, Aston Martin might come out the blocks firing and have a really good car, but when you look at where Drugovich is probably going to be in comparison to Fernando Alonso, it's going to be night and day. Whether they'll be able to capitalize fully, I'm not convinced. But I still think with the state of their car, it certainly makes them the biggest winner from testing.
This is the thing, that if you're looking at actually like the biggest improvement, some wise person by the name Tom P1 Bellingham actually predicted that Aston Martin would finish 4th in the Constructors' title and got absolutely roasted by Twitch chat. But here we are now calling them the biggest winner from testing. So part of me wants to be smug, but I still have the biggest fear that they will be incredibly unreliable. Because it's Fernando Alonso.
Let's move on now to our biggest loser from testing. This one I think is quite clear for me anyway, that I'm going with McLaren. So I've already kind of said why. I also want to put into the mix potentially Alpine in some ways, just purely because, and again, it's testing. Don't mind about times, but I don't think they really ever showed any kind of even glimpse that they'll be good. Now, they might be good, so I'm covering that off now, and they may have just had a completely different run plan, but it doesn't make sense in my head as a very novice Formula One knowledge person, why they wouldn't have at least one moment of pace, just to see what that car is capable of. I know they can in the data figure out, even with turned down engines, where they can manage, but it's just weird for me that Alpine just very anonymous over all 3 days of testing.
The most anonymous team by far, really. It's just so hard to understand where they are in the pecking order, and I think that's what's confused the rest of the grid. But yeah, biggest loser, it's got to be McLaren for their unreliability. I wouldn't class them as biggest loser, but I think Mercedes have probably struggled a little bit more than expected. Mercedes are just that team that you feel like you can never count out. Even last year, we were saying it when Hamilton was getting lapped by Verstappen in Imola, and it's like, they'll be back, and it just kept going on, and you're like, no, they will be back.
They were eventually.
They were eventually. They got that win. So you never know with Mercedes because, like we said on stream, there was that year in 2021 where they had an awful test and then ended up winning the first race. Mercedes are one of those teams that you just never know quite how it's going to go, but they've not really wowed people. I think a lot of people thought that they would really take the fight to Red Bull this year, and hopefully they do.
Before we go, Tommy, what are your final thoughts?
The hype of that mini race that we got at the end of the test session, actually, that got me absolutely buzzing for the season because testing wasn't that thrilling by the end of the